Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Rational Standard. I am Martin van Staden. We have another full lineup this week. I think it's the fourth week maybe in a row that we have a full roster. I'm joined by Ayanda Zulu, Zakhele Mthembu, and David Ansara. And we have two topics today. I think both quite recent, and I definitely quite discursive, quite getting people's passions riled up. So the first one I think that we need to talk about is from 2 days ago. That is, I should actually share my screen, but I'll do that for the second story. So Julius Malema, the man himself, the commander in chief, or the convicted in court now, um, has been found guilty of a set of firearm related offences in the East London Magistrates Court. And this is an old case, and I think that's worth pointing out. This is from 2018, when at one of the EFF's infamous birthday bashes, he was handed a rifle and he fired into the air on video in this kind of heavily crowded stadium. So two of the five charges, I think the two relevant charges are unlawful or the discharging of a firearm in a built-up or public area without sufficient reason. So obviously, if you're defending yourself, you are in fact allowed to shoot in a built-up or public area. But if you're just shooting for shits and giggles, you're not allowed to do that. And the other one is unlawful possession of a firearm. I think as liberals and libertarians, for us, the key worry here is shooting randomly in a populated area, not so much the unlawful possession of a firearm. I think we all have uh, views about whether the state should be involved in telling us when we can and cannot possess firearms. And one of the other charges is also unlawful possession of ammunition, which I mean that's actually a bit ridiculous. But this is 7 years ago. This is an old case, and the worry that I think that many people have, and I'm gonna kind of play open cards here. My big issue with this is the two-tier justice system, and it's not a racial two-tier or a gender two-tier system. It is a class two-tier system. If you are a politician or a politically adjacent individual, um, you might be found guilty in court of something. Getting there will take absolute years or decades, like in the case of Jacob Zuma. He was in court in the early 2000s. The case was dropped because it was politically sensitive. Then he was back in court a decade later, and again a decade later, and still he is a free man. And when they did in fact arrest him, it had to be for a very weird kind of contrived and weird way. And then he was paroled anyway within like basically days of being remanded into custody. And of Julius Malema, he committed a public order offense, let's say, on video. If I did this, me, Martin van Staden, if there's a video of me shooting like a cowboy in public, I will be arrested very quickly, and I would have been in prison now for probably 6 or 7 years already. But because it's Julius Malema, because he's a politically active person, he he remained out of custody, and I guess the issue here is, and I've been saying this online. Maybe I'm a cynic, but I don't think that he's going to be imprisoned. I think that the fact that sentencing has been delayed to January of next year, in what I would say is a very simple public order case, the judge could say, "Hey, come back in 2 days. I'll do sentencing." But no, it's been delayed to January, and even then, he would need to be given a 12-month plus sentence to be disqualified from parliament. So I probably think my gut tells me that if he will be sentenced to prison time, it will be 11 months and 29 days, just to ensure that the political issue here doesn't roll over. And if he's sentenced at all, and it's more than 12 months, and he's then disqualified from parliament for a period of 5 years, I fully expect that he will either be paroled for some reason within very, very short order, or he will be pardoned, kind of in the same way that Jacob Zuma was. Kind of not to say that, oh, the man is pardoned, but to say, oh, there's these many thousands of offenders in our prisons and they're now being let out to make space and minor offenses, and Mr. Malema will happen to be one of those. So that is my cynical take on what's happening here. I'm not sharing in the jubilation. I think that holding politicians and politically adjacent people in South Africa legally accountable is actually a firmly closed and locked door. It does not happen. It cannot, in fact, happen. And I think a lot of people get their hopes up unnecessarily around it, and that people should rather detach themselves from this system helping them with that problem. You need a political solution to this problem. So yeah, that's my take. We'll get into the second topic a bit later, but yeah, let's go around the room. Ayanda, let's start with you. What's your feeling around this whole thing?
Thank you very much, Martin, for giving me an opportunity to share my views. I think for me, what has been not surprising to see is the reaction from EFF members surrounding the case itself and how Julius Malema has been found guilty. Many of them have framed the ruling as, some agenda to persecute Julius Malema, and they're claiming that the justice system in the country is being weaponized to persecute him, and yet this is the same justice system that not long ago upheld the ruling that kill the Boer is, not hate speech, and that people should have the freedom to chant this thing, at rallies or wherever they want to chant it. So on one hand, when the court rules in their favor, as I've noted, they clap for it, and they say there's nothing wrong. But on the other hand, when it rules against him and it finds him guilty in this case of discharging a firearm at a rally and endangering people's lives and properties, then all of a sudden it is a problem. He's being persecuted, and there's something wrong. So for me, really, what has been amusing is the hypocrisy surrounding this and the lack of consistency in how people view the courts. I think we all saw what happened. There's video footage of Julius Malema discharging this firearm at the rally. There was ballistic evidence. There was a cartridge found near the venue where he was, which shows that there was a weapon which was fired that day. So this idea again that there isn't any evidence which proves that he did in fact fire that weapon is not true. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence that shows that he did indeed discharge a firearm at that rally, and that he is guilty of those charges that have been leveled against him. The last point that I want to make is that it is Julius Malema himself who must be held accountable for what happened. People cannot blame whoever handed the weapon to him. It is not that person's fault. It is his fault. He made the decision to fire into the crowd, and no one can really hold the person who handed the weapon to him accountable. I think those are just my initial thoughts around what happened.
David, let's go over to you.
Yeah, Martin, in your introduction, you spoke about the two-tier justice system, and I think that is a trend that we've been observing for a while, and a worrying one. I think, as you would have more eloquently than me articulated in your book on the rule of law, the rule of law is not just the way that the state imposes order on us citizens. It is an overriding principle that all people, regardless of your political power or your status in society, are subject to the same rules. And that supersedes the authority of the state. Those are designed to uphold your inalienable rights. And it is very important, given the extreme power that politicians have, that they are constrained in their use of power, and that their ability to exercise their power is limited. So I think Yeah, the kind of granular details of the case, I don't have kind of strong opinions on it. I think you're right to maybe raise question marks around these issues around unlawful possession. I don't think necessarily it should be the state's role to determine whether you ought or ought not to own a gun. But it's kind of like the John Stuart Mill principle of you have a right to swing your fist, but that right ends at the tip of my nose. And if you're endangering other people by firing indiscriminately into the air, that could potentially result in some pretty catastrophic harm. So I think there's a justifiable limitation on your right there to bear arms. Just like you have a right to buy a steak knife, but if you wield that steak knife at somebody in a threatening way, then you're committing a crime. So I think, I think we need to just watch the fallout from this. There's a lot of speculation about what may or may not happen to Malema. But in an ideal system, you would want the process of the legal mechanisms to unfold, regardless of who he is, and whether or not he's politically powerful or on the ascendancy or the descendancy. It shouldn't matter. But unfortunately, I think the public is right to be incredulous about this process. If you think of Shabir Sheikh, you mentioned Jacob Zuma, the rules are sort of manipulated along the way to suit whatever particular agenda is favorable at the time. I think we really need to get back to a much more rule-bound approach.
Absolutely. Zakes.
Yeah. So I think you covered it best, right? This is a statutory crime. So really, I don't know whether the podcast knows about my feelings on statutes in general in legal theory, but yeah, it is what it is, right? But like unlawful possession is the easy one. I can be a stickler, which I think is pretty interesting because this is something concerning firearms, right? In saying that like the harm in and of itself, there has to be a better standard, right? If he was shooting it directly at the crowd, maybe then you are like, okay, cool, that is definitely identifiable harm. Just think that it's too far removed. But as per the letter of the law, I mean, they found him guilty, so there's nothing to be said about that because he's exactly according to the statute. He did something he was not supposed to do. But yeah, for me, the legal brain in me is like, man, this harm business. I want to read more harm articles that can maybe help my argument because I'm like, it is too far removed. What happens, if I'm in a public area, a national park, and I shoot into the air? I mean, I guess there aren't any people around. Is it better? What if there are like, people driving around in safari vehicles? There are people around, but like, but this is me being a stickler, which is very interesting to me because I find the principle in and of itself, right? In an ideal libertarian world, do we want judges ruling like this? I would err on the side of no, but yeah, there's that. And then to your point, Martin, I'm also pretty cynical when it comes to really the consequences that politicians face for their actions, right? As I most famously say, well, famous in my household, that like when I heard, Leon Lowe give an interview on the news and talking about commissions of inquiries being, kangaroo courts, something like clicked in me. I was like, yeah, they are. Why? And it's the same thing that is happening. You see it in the Madanga Commission right now at our latest, theater, as I like to call it, whereby you have evidence being presented for prima facie crimes, but these people are still walking around free, getting government salaries and everything. And I'm like, but how? But how? And as you are right, if any of us were found guilty of doing, like, if there was a video of us shooting a gun into the air, like we would have been in jail. We'll probably be applying for our parole by now. So there's that. But yeah, for politicians though, the process seems to be shifty, right? They seem to create new rules for them. They seem to create things that are only, applicable to them, really. Commissions of inquiries being the greatest example, and the lack of prosecution, right? Even when people are screaming for prosecutions, our previous one in state capture, it is bringing us nothing, and there's a new one now, and I think it will bring us nothing. So to your point, I don't think that he will be sentenced, and if he will be, it'll be, you know, a very, very short stint in prison. So yeah, there is that. But he will probably be appealing it, you know, some good old Stalingrad tactics. So it'll probably be drawn out for as long as possible. And when we do finally get a ruling, it won't be something that will reflect the normal rulings that one would get in a court for, you know, an unlawful discharge of a firearm in a public place. So yeah, there is that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean it's an interesting question for me because I mean this has long been a topic of discussion on the left and let's say maybe primarily in the US, this idea that if you're rich and powerful, then the just different rules kind of apply to you. But I wonder to what degree this is a kind of is there really a guy arriving at the Justice Department with a suitcase full of money late at night, kind of sitting down with someone and saying, "Okay, let's come to an arrangement on this." I, I don't think so. I don't necessarily think so. I think that there is, and Professor Quest Malan kind of speaks about this in his book, specifically around kind of how the law is applied. By the courts. But I think even beyond that, I think there is what you could call an elite understanding. There is an understanding amongst the elite around the world, really, that if you reach a certain stature, the rules don't really apply to you anymore. The thing that's been annoying me, kind of on this topic a lot lately has been Greta Thunberg. She's just been arrested by the Israeli military, but that's complicated. What's simpler is that for all of this beginning of this year, and I think a lot of last year, she was involved in various kinds of protests in Europe. Kind of, I think about the environment, about Gaza, whatever. And she was arrested at multiple of those protests, like blocking roads and whatever, and people are arrested. You're arrested, you're breaking the law. Cuffs, you're arrested, you're put in the car and taken to prison. And yet, within days, she appears in another country protesting again. And it struck me that, like, and I posted about this, it's like if I was arrested in France, for instance, or whatever, if I was blocking a highway and the French police arrested me, I would still be in prison in France now. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to different countries and be arrested by different police forces. I would have still been in prison in the first country. But because it's Greta Thunberg, she gets arrested. They take her around the corner. They let her go. She goes. She gets arrested. Like, do I think that she has a group of lawyers who follow her around and pay off the cops? No, I don't. I think that there is just an elite understanding. I think the station commanders, maybe the police officers themselves, they just understand. I have now arrested Greta Thunberg. I obviously cannot charge her or put a kind of write her up. I need to let her go. And I think that to a large degree, that is the same in South Africa. I think that if Malema is going to appeal, I think when that case comes across the docket of the Supreme Court of Appeal, I don't think the judges are going to tell each other, hey, it's Malema, you know what to do. We're going to find him innocent. I think they just understand subconsciously that we need to contrive a judgment that condemns breaches to public order, yes, condemns kind of breaking the law, but ultimately finds that he must be acquitted. That's just kind of an elite understanding, and that's a problem. But I think it's basically normal. How many American presidents are guilty of war crimes? The notion of them ever going to prison, it is completely kind of unthinkable. It will just never happen. And this applies in every country on the planet. Like you have these examples in South Korea, which might be exceptional, and in some Asian countries where politicians do in fact go to prison. Maybe that's indicative of a slightly different political culture. But basically, normally around the world, if you're part of the political elite or adjacent to it, there's just no question. You can effectively do whatever you want and you will be fine. Even if you're an opposition politician, funny enough. I mean, you go to prison as an opposition politician for not committing a crime in many countries, but if you do in fact commit a crime, like in a semi-stable society, even as an opposition politician, you will be okay. And then South Africa has had its fair share of these examples. There was a guy, I think it was also in East London, a councillor, Andile Lusinga, I think. There's a video of him taking a water jug, I think, and smashing it over someone's head. Like, that is not just assault. That's kind of assault to do grievous bodily harm. You could have killed that person. I think he was paroled literally within 2 weeks of being convicted and put in prison. So yeah, we have no shortage of examples on this topic in South Africa, and yeah, I've kind of learned to accept it. I don't let it get me down, but it does still fester with some people. And I think that's the right emotional reaction to have, but I do think it's counterproductive. I think the expectation that the criminal justice system will hold politicians accountable is a dangerous one, and you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. That doesn't mean you have to abandon notions of justice. It just means you have to think in different terms about how, in fact, you get justice. And in this case, like I said earlier, I think the solution can only be political. Julius Malema's political base must abandon him, or they must become, I don't know, disinterested in politics and stop voting EFF like many have. But that is ultimately where that solution lies, or you just make him irrelevant. I mean, we're going to talk about the press a little bit later, but that's also one thing that can be done, is you can make someone irrelevant and then they kind of fade into obscurity as well. Those are the kinds of solutions that I think people need to be thinking in terms of. David?
Yeah, I think later we're going to talk about the inconsistent or hypocritical approaches, reactions that you often see in the media to various issues. And one such example is a few weeks ago, we were talking about the attack on Ian Cameron. And people then, commentators were saying, Tusk, Ian shouldn't have shot that assailant who was trying to smash his head in with a brick. He should have fired a warning shot into the air, was the criticism. But now that I'm sure some of those same people are saying, shame on Julius Malema for firing shots into the air in an urban environment. So I think there is just generally a kind of a lack of consistency, lack of adherence to principle. I mean, I think something that we should be mindful of, we obviously staunch opponents of Malema's worldview and his philosophy. I'm still annoyed that he stole the phrase economic freedom in our lifetime from the classical liberals, because that would have been great. And last week you guys were chatting about the economic freedom of the world report. So I think a good slogan for that would have been economic freedom in our lifetime. But putting that aside, I think people are obviously desperate to see some level of accountability for Malema and his actions. And so, I think a lot of people will view this as, this is like an Al Capone strategy. You can't necessarily attack the whole web of the criminal network that he leads, but if you can get him on tax evasion or some other kind of minor thing, then you can kind of undermine him. Look, I do think that was pretty reckless behavior from Malema that could have resulted in harm. But we must just be careful about, sort of abandoning our principles to say, okay, well, we just want to see the downfall of this Marxist-Leninist Africanist who dominates our media feeds.
Yeah. Ayanda, any further thoughts on this?
I think David has pretty much said what I did want to say earlier on, which is that I do again want to say this, that it is dangerous. It is dangerous for you to discharge a firearm in a
I think we lost Ayanda there.
So we got a
yeah, you're back, Ayanda. I see. Yeah, Ayanda's back.
Sorry about that. having technical difficulties. I think it's because of the weather as well, so it keeps affecting the connection. But as I was saying, the other problematic thing about the case is him being dishonest and him saying that this was a toy gun. I think this is also something else which we need to look at as well. This obviously wasn't a toy gun, and if you do watch the video, you can hear him firing it in the air as well. So I think his legal team as well also made a dishonest argument, sort of in court. So that is something else which we need to look at. But the other bigger thing here, which we also need to be aware of, is what can be termed a herd mentality within the EFF, which is something which is also concerning. I haven't heard anyone in the EFF that I know or that I'm familiar with actually come out and acknowledge the fact that what their leader did was incorrect, it was wrong, and it could have placed other people's lives in jeopardy. All of them have come out in his defense. There's not one single person who is standing up for the truth in the EFF. And for me, that is concerning, and it indicates that we are also dealing with a cult of personality within the EFF, where there's sort of an near worship of Malema, and no one within the organization is actually willing to criticize him, even when he's wrong or even when he engages in reckless behavior. So I think that is the other concerning dimension of this case. It's this cult of personality that we have within the EFF, where you have EFF members coming out as well and insulting people and calling people all sorts of names, So I think those were just the 2 points that I wanted to add, in addition to what I had said earlier.
Yeah, well said. Zakes?
Yeah. I think, to your point, Martin, about the elite mentality, really, I think that is for me the most important, right? Seemingly, when you reach a certain sphere of society, just consequences no longer apply to you. You can do things that normal people can do, and it cannot attract the same consequences. And I think that to me is I guess, disheartening. And yeah, because I am idealistic when it comes to the law, so it is very disheartening to see it also just buckle under the pressure of the elite, right? Hence to your solution, which I do agree with, that it is a political problem, and as such, it will need a political solution, and maybe only then can the law follow suit when the leaders in society are consciously pursuing something like this. But then the self-interest analyst in me is like, is there ever gonna be an elite that's gonna be, hey, let us subject ourselves to the same scrutiny we put these plebs, and I don't think they will ever do that. So yeah, it is something to think about. Your point about Greta is very interesting. I'm like the lawyer in me is like, how is she even getting bail? She's definitely not getting charged because she cannot get bail anywhere. She's she's a risk. She's a travel risk. So she's not getting charged, meaning, man, imagine being the protester who's with her in that sense. You get taken into the police van and you just see her waving. And the next week, as you go to court, she's in a different country doing the exact same thing. That is, yeah, yeah. Or to be elite, right? Yeah, to be elite. But it is pretty disheartening, but also I guess can be pretty funny to show how even in societies where people would think that we have a lot of freedoms and things like that, something medieval like this, for lack of a better term, can still happen, whereby the Lord is just beyond any reproach and there's nothing you can do. But I guess it's the access to the elite that is different from the medieval times, right? Anyone can be elite if you're popular enough with the masses, as they would say. So yeah, it should be interesting to Malema's point whether we'll see that. I don't think that he will even get a sentence, to your point, Martin. And I don't think it is conscious too. I don't think there's like a smoke-filled room of people who are like, yo, we aren't gonna do this thing. But it is something that seems to be understood because it happens so many times on different vectors that you cannot help but think, okay, so this is how the world operates. We don't do this to certain people who are, popular enough or beloved enough or important enough to certain people. So yeah, it is something to definitely look at. We are in for a very long appeal process. And the other harm aspects, I'll probably write an article about it, because the legal aspect of it interests me a great deal. I don't like how our legal system looks at guns, and considering our crime levels, it's like they are totally operating on a different world, where they think that South Africans should have a harder time accessing the only thing they have as defense against dangerous criminals. So yeah, that's that too. But yeah, those are my, I guess, final thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, just a very brief one. I think Pala Pala in 2020 is another example. Like, if you go and open your passport and you flip through the leaves of the passport, it says, "You shall declare any foreign currency to the bank upon your return, or else you will be held liable under this act or that act." And then there's the president with, I don't know how many millions of greenbacks in his couch. So, I think that's a good example of, we wouldn't actually necessarily have a problem with somebody having some hard currency. And that's part of your economic freedom, actually. Like, if I had $6 million and enough space under my couch, surely that's my prerogative. That's a problem I'm unfortunate not to have. But, the fact that there is a law and that the president is able to defy it with zero accountability, I think is very problematic.
Yeah, no, it's all about equality before the law, and I mean it's it's complicated, because a lot of time you think that, well, the law is bad, and therefore if he gets away with breaking it, we shouldn't have an issue with that, because the law per se is bad. So it's his economic freedom, so he shouldn't be punished for it. But then you realize, but he's part of the architecture of that law. Like, if Cyril Ramaphosa said, hey, let's get rid of these kind of antiquated exchange control regulations, it will happen. It will in fact happen. But even during the Pala Pala thing, he didn't even allude to that. He didn't say that, I'm innocent, but really, we should look into these things, because this seems a bit odd to me. Never. No. He believes firmly that if you are a normal pleb and you bring in hard currency, you must declare it so that the ANC knows. So yeah, it's a tough one, but that's my understanding of why you have this evasive notion of equality before the law, is to in fact stop the elites from kind of twisting the law in their favor. And but yeah, I think it's necessarily evasive. It is a legal fiction in a very real sense. I'm glad we have the legal fiction. I think we should keep it, but the follow through is very, very minor. So that is something to think about and to worry about. But because the rest of the world does the same thing, it's not clear to me that we'll find a legal solution to it. I think that elite understanding is simply too overriding. And then again, it goes back a long time. We had various scandals during the apartheid years. The Information Gate scandal. No senior politician went to prison for that, even though the whole point that it was a scandal was that it was in fact illegal. So yeah, and Zakes brought up the commissions of inquiry thing. That's a normal feature whenever the elite does something wrong. I mean, everyone is still cheering on the Madlanga Commission, and I think the revelations are interesting. But if I were accused of bribing the police and kind of doing all the things that some of these people are accused of, they wouldn't appoint a former judge to kind of have a commission of inquiry into me. We have a system for that. It's called the National Prosecuting Authority charges me and I go to court. But no, for the elite, we will have a commission of inquiry. So yeah, and like Ayanda mentions the herd mentality. I mean, the funny thing about that for me is that the EFF is probably our best leftist party. I mean, it's probably the most pure incarnation of the communist mentality, certainly more than the Communist Party. And that kind of perspective is no, we oppose elitism. We're socialists. We're for the common man, but yet they will defend Julius Malema to the ends of the earth, even though they see how the law is being twisted to accommodate him. I mean, on the kill the Boer thing, I mean, say what you want. The fact is that the EFF celebrated those judgments and said that these are indications of our courts being good. But now suddenly the courts are captured and compromised. So it shows that the principles are malleable depending on the circumstances and specifically how that affects their leaders. I remember when like every once in a while you have people pointing out how Julius Malema lives at large and other EFF leaders live at large, and then EFF members would respond to say that um, you're just saying that because he's black, and you're saying that black people aren't entitled to have a wealthy lifestyle. And it's like, no, but that's not the point. You're communists. You're communists. Remember, I should not have to remind you that you are, in fact, communists. This is a problem regardless of the race. But no, because it's Malema, they have to let go of those principles and make it something else. So yeah, I think it's interesting. The herd mentality, the elite understanding, and yeah, I think that reinforces for me what we as classical liberals need to do. We need to abandon the old theory of, well, the institution will protect us, and actually understand that the institutions are basically fair weather. And it's only in a more ideal society that they work closer as intended. But until we get there, we're gonna have to do a lot of state proofing. We're gonna have to engage in some Machiavellian tactics, I'm sorry to say, and do various other things that don't fit neatly within the kind of cardboard cutout of what is allowable in political contestation and kind of following the process and so forth. But yeah, I think that kind of exhausts this topic. I'm sure we're going to be speaking about it a few more times in the coming weeks and months as the appeal process starts going, and as new judgments come out in January certainly, and then thereafter by other courts. But I want to pivot a little bit now. It's not a huge pivot. We're still going to be discussing a bit of the same things, but this article by Adriaan Basson on the 30th of September in News 24. The high price of News 24 is fact-based journalism. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but effectively what this is, and just kind of to contextualize for people who don't know, News 24 is South Africa's biggest by far press platform. So there is quite a bit of relevance here, and Adriaan Basson is their editor-in-chief. What this comes down to is let's say an attack on what we could say is the alternative press, kind of specifically he takes aim at podcasters, and when he goes on to X he calls them pod bros, basically saying that there is a higher quality of journalism expected from normal press, and that News 24 kind of adheres to these standards and the alternative press doesn't, and that's why it's important to trust kind of platforms like News 24 over these alternative platforms, and he makes a whole spiel about why a free press is important to democracy and so forth. But this kind of spilled out onto social media, because many of you will be aware that News 24 has had issues, let's say in the last while, in the last several years, in fact, maybe decades, around its and I shouldn't just pick on News 24. There's a broader problem with our mainstream press, but issues around twisting reporting and investigative journalism around opinion. A lot of opinion is presented as journalism. A lot of opinion is represented as news reporting. A lot of opinion is presented as fact checking. And we've discussed a few of those instances here on the show before. We discussed the Ian Cameron thing that David mentioned, about how that was kind of reported, and how little fact checking there in fact was around is a brick a weapon? The answer is yes, but you didn't see that come out in the press reporting on a lot of these comments that parties like Good made to say that, well, they were unarmed. It's like, no, they had bricks, they were armed. The brick is a weapon. And a lot of these issues of the press twisting its reporting to hide what is in fact the journalists simply sharing their opinion on a given event stated in seemingly impartial terms, that is not being sufficiently acknowledged. And I think for me, the issue is that let me just see what else I have. Kind of how they responded to this online. So here you can see my Twitter feed. Jacques Maria is sharing kind of the Jan Braai issue. Just to remind you, Jan Braai he's a popular kind of personality. He was making hot dogs in the parking lot of a food lovers market a while back, and somehow that became a race thing because this is South Africa, and of course it did. And it was effectively argued that he wasn't making braai broodjies for black shoppers coming through the area, and obviously that was disproven within minutes, within hours probably. And News 24 apologized, but what has been pointed out is that they never held their journalists accountable, and they never fired or reprimanded anyone, at least not in public. And this is pointed out to Peter du Toit, their associate editor, and his response is, "You're an empty amateur. Crawl back to the pod bros, where you came from." There's our friend Ronaldo Hoos kind of getting into this, and this is probably the biggest kind of issue is that this is Peter du Toit. He appeared on Kyk Net Verslag a while back with Willie Spies, and they went after the account called Twatterbaas, which was a pretty popular Twitter account, kind of sharing his views on kind of what's happening in South Africa, specifically in light of Donald Trump's interest in what's happening in South Africa. A little bit quite edgy for my tastes personally, but ultimately News 24 went after him and effectively doxed him, kind of sharing his location, his address, his name. Obviously, he was behind the pseudonym, and that, from what I heard, kind of ruined his life, basically. And remember, this is just a guy with a Twitter account, like, and then Peter du Toit went on to this show with Willie Spies, who is Twatterbaas's lawyer, effectively arguing why this had to be done. And obviously, it's because Twatterbaas was a divisive figure, he's a racist, etc. And through it all, the question is, why does this matter to you? You're journalists. You're the fourth estate. You should be keeping you should be holding power to account, not engaging in kind of this tabloid gossip about, oh, this guy said hurty things for my feelings, and therefore we ruined his life using our overwhelming resources. But I think Sky ZA, which is Leanne, she's been on the show before. I don't know if she made this video. And I don't know if you're gonna get sound, but I'm just gonna play this and we'll see. Because if you want to accuse other people of being divisive, you don't get to do this. It shows how News 24 specifically has over the years engaged in what I would describe as race hustling quite consistently. And if this is not divisive in South Africa's specific context, then I don't know what is. And a lot of this stuff is obviously opinion articles that News 24 shares, but you'll never see content in their opinion docket that works in the other direction. They represent a very specific take on race matters, and it's always directed in one direction. So yeah, I'm not going to show this whole video, but it's quite funny, and I would I would encourage everyone to have a look on Sky ZA's platform. But yeah, I've now hogged the mic for a while. Let's go to you, David. What's your take on the attack on the alternative press? And is it fair? And should we should we give the guys who have journalist degrees our undying faith?
We should not give them undying faith, but I mean, it does show that the hostile fire, I think, means that you're flying over enemy territory. And I mean, we are part of the insurgency in the media world as well, in our own small way, creating an alternative platform. And I think, you can be derisive about the pod bros and everything, but I think that has greatly enriched the media landscape. I think the days of gatekeepers determining what you can consume or not are long over. I wrote a piece on this on the Rational Standard called "Trust Must Be Earned," and I spoke about this fragmentation of the media landscape, and we saw this with Donald Trump's campaign last year in November. He didn't really spend much time at all on the traditional networks, and I contrasted this to the era in the 60s and the 70s when Walter Cronkite was the voice of the nation, and his view of what was happening in the Vietnam War was pivotal in terms of shaping public opinion. But that era is long gone. And I think established press like News 24, they're hearkening back to this previous time where they were the kind of authority on matters. But look, your reputation as a news outlet is very fragile. If you're going to be engaging in these kind of attacks on people, if you're going to be showcasing a very particular ideological viewpoint, you must expect people to react to that. And I do think that the role in the alternative media space, I do think there is a lack of proper journalistic capacity in terms of reporting on events that are unfolding and getting to the bottom of the matter. I do think that is something that the alternative media space does need to grapple with. But in this article, I spoke about independent journalists. If you think of somebody like James Myburgh, Marie-Louise Antoni, she was doing the hard work, for example, on what was that, Residence Wilgenhof in Stellenbosch. And, there was a whole lot of noise. I didn't follow the story that closely, but there was a whole lot of noise being generated by the likes of News 24, making all sorts of unfounded allegations around racism and discrimination, which was subsequently disproven, right? And where we were talking about political accountability for the elites earlier, there was similarly a lack of accountability for that misreporting. And somebody like Marie-Louise Antoni, she's a private citizen. She just went and did the hard work and wrote extensively on this topic. So yeah, maybe the kind of big media houses do have more journalistic capacity, but their agenda often distorts how that capacity is utilized as well. So, and, I think nobody disputes the good work that a lot of the investigative journalists like Jeff Wicks have been doing in terms of exposing corruption and malfeasance. But I do think your question around challenging power, Martin, is a very difficult one for them to answer, because we've seen a lot of obsequious fawning over the ANC. I mean, do you remember during COVID, talking about family meetings, like we're all kind of being headed by this patriarch, and, speaking about how majestic Cyril was. And, there's some really serious problems in South Africa, and corruption is but a manifestation of the underlying structural political economy problems that have been caused by the ANC's governance model. And so my concern is that the likes of News 24 kind of say, well, look at all the good work we're doing exposing corruption, and look at all the kind of festering boils on the body politic. But actually there's an underlying illness that they're not diagnosing. And I think the alternative media, the reason it's been so successful is because you've had channels like Morning Shot or, Ronaldo, just as an individual. You've got Rational Standard now. The Common Sense is also doing really excellent journalistic work, utilizing a lot of new technology as well. That's very exciting and a platform to watch. I'm writing for them as a columnist as well. But the reason those alternative platforms have been so successful is they don't have the same kind of misgivings about challenging power, actually. And people are deeply frustrated and feeling very impotent in the face of a lot of these governance abuses. And so it's very paradoxical when you see News 24 talking about how billions were stolen from a public hospital, and then you read the editorial, which says, oh, we just need to back Cyril and back the reform agenda. It's very inconsistent. So, I think they should maybe look inward and say, well, what are we doing to elicit these kind of reactions? Is it just a bunch of right-wingers who are spreading misinformation online, or are there actually aspects of our reporting that are raising serious questions about our credibility and our ideological motivations?
Absolutely. Ayanda.
Well, I do think the first important point that we do have to raise, which should be obvious to any honest person, is that um, we have to debunk this myth of impartiality, like in the media space. I think a lot of people, even media houses like News 24, would want to convince us that they report issues from an impartial perspective, they aren't partisan. But I think that isn't true. And the one thing that I do appreciate about us in the liberal space is that we don't lie about, being impartial or anything. Our stance is very clear on issues, even on our platforms like the Rational Standard. We write from a particular worldview, we have a particular perspective on issues, and there are certain values that we sort of promote. But part of the problem with the mainstream press is that for years, it has tried to create this impression that it is impartial on reporting. And it has almost, in a sense, also tried to monopolize public discourse and the interpretation of public discourse. So what has happened in recent years is that people have actually seen that and they have responded to that. So the alternative media is, in fact, a direct response to issues that we have in the mainstream press. And all these media houses that you see springing up are really trying to offer us, different views and different perspectives, as opposed to the single perspective that the mainstream press wants to impose on everyone. So the rise of alternative media has been a very positive development, because now all of us, I mean, even those of us who are who are on X and on platforms like Facebook, all of us now also in the media space. If News 24 wants to say Jan Bry is being racist, I can say, hey man, I have my phone, I'm literally at that place. I can take a video and put it on X and be like, you guys are lying, because I'm at the exact venue where your journalist is, and you're saying this is racist, but I'm saying I'm there. So also in the age of media and the digital age, all of us now also have the power to also contribute to these discussions as well in the media space, and that has been a positive. My only concern with the alternative media space as well, because I do have issues. I think David has already hinted at it. It is journalistic capacity. The other thing as well, which is problematic, is how certain things are also framed in the alternative media space. I do get the sense that at times certain issues are exaggerated in how they are reported. So in that regard, alternative media houses could also do better if they want to enhance their credibility. They could do better as well, in reporting more responsibly on issues and not exaggerating them for engagement and things of the like. Because someone like Boss, for instance, who I did follow on X, I did agree with a lot of the things he was saying, but at times I do get the sense that he was being unnecessarily inflammatory in the things that he was tweeting, and you could tell that he was trying to get engagement from people. So I do think at times that the alternative press should not get stuck into the issues that we saw in the mainstream press, where you see people sort of posting things or writing about things for likes and clicks. Even the Anpri thing was clearly an attempt to generate engagement. And there are many other cases where you see them clearly trying to generate engagement. Even now with Ronaldo host going to VF Plus, there were even attempts there to also drive that as well. So I think there's a need on both ends, whether it's mainstream press and alternative media, to really report more responsibly on things. These are things that people are consuming. These are things that shape people's views. So there is a need for us to be more responsible. But the rise of alternative media has been a very positive development, both in South Africa and across the world. I think the days where a single perspective or a single way of viewing the world was imposed on us are done, and we now have alternatives, and we now have different perspectives, and we can use to sort of analyze South Africa and the issues that we have.
Yeah, agreed. No, well said. Thanks.
Yeah. I unfortunately all of these alternative media figures seem to be very active on X/Twitter, and I'm not active there at all for reasons
You're
that,
not missing anything.
yeah, I know. But yeah. But like, I come from a very laissez-faire, like just let people be. If you just give people options and let them be, they will eventually gravitate to whatever is best to them, right? And then maybe you can try and have a conversation, as and then David have, like, mentioned how maybe you can improve on the alternative media side, the journalistic integrity of most of the things that they do. And then on the mainstream media side, right, there is the whole maybe being more upfront about, how the views of the people who are unnamed and the stuff reports are there. And when you read the thing that they are reporting on, it clearly has a slant in a particular manner, right? So I'm like, there are definitely improvements to be made, but the great thing about the digital age, and I love this, is that all the gatekeepers, for lack of a better term, are gonna find it's extremely difficult to gatekeep, because the great thing about the internet is that it makes things accessible, it makes communication easier, and with a medium like the media, when the like media houses, traditional media houses used to be, bottlenecks whereby you could feed information and then what comes out is something like that goes to, the general mass public. But now they no longer have that power, right? Like YouTube channels have probably the YouTube channels that get more views than actual like traditional TV channels or things like that. And like the idea of 24-hour news cycles too, as a tangent thought, is so weird to me. I hope that is the first thing that does, because there's no way you can have no things down, like find important things, let them digestible at least for an hour and then go away, news person. But they no longer have that power, and I think it is very scary for them. That is why they are trying to wield, I guess, some form of power and saying we are the integrity bunch. Although that, was eviscerated, the internet eviscerates that. Every time you, like, we see you, lying, it becomes very hard for people to believe you. But on the other side too, right? Unlike guys on independent media, they also like say some pretty weird stuff. But and that is also contributing to the fact that that's why people are like, you heard this from a YouTube video or something, and it is used in a manner of, okay, we aren't gonna take you seriously, right? And that is an L, I guess, us as alternative media have to hold. But yeah, I just love people having the freedom to choose. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's part of the reason why I love the internet. It gives people the ability to choose, and wherever the people gravitate, really, whether you agree or not, I guess you can have a conversation about that. But you cannot dispute that there's clearly a market demand for other voices that aren't News 24 or Times Live or anything like that. And I say, what's the problem? Let them all duke it out. I still, every day read all the major news publications, and also have a whole lot of YouTube channels that I also consume. And I love that I get to have both at the same time. And guys, people like Adriaan, I guess maybe self-interest is like, if there are less alternative media guys, more potential subscribers for me. But I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm sure he also has alternative media he watches and enjoys and considers objective. So I think options are always great. Free markets win. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, well said. I mean, for me, I think the issue with this News 24 thing specifically is that, and I have specifically the this article that Adriaan Basson wrote in mind, and then more specifically how these journalists are engaging online, because it's really a shit show if you just go and kind of read what they're saying and how obtuse and how confrontational they are with people they should be trying to win over. But what they are effectively doing is saying, because we did good work on the Tembesa Hospital and Babita Decoran assassinations, and because we did good work on exposing Paul Bashatile's corrupt dealings, and because we did good work on this thing, that thing, and the other, therefore you are not allowed to criticize us for the Jan Braai thing. You're not allowed to criticize us for kind of my own personal engagement with the disinformation desk is on the index of race law, where they keep saying there's no race laws in South Africa, but look at all these race laws. You're not allowed to criticize us for that, and you're not allowed to criticize us for having a very slanted editorial policy of who we publish and what we allow them to say versus who we don't publish and what we don't allow them to say. You're not allowed to criticize us for those things, because look at this good work that we did on these few things. And what I've been trying to point out is that not one of the pod bros that you are viciously going after, not a single one of them, criticized you for your expose on Tembisa Hospital. Not one of them did that. Not one of them said, "Oh, how dare News 24? Look at how what trash they're saying on Tembisa Hospital." No, no, they all cited you. They all found your work on the Tembisa Hospital, and they used it because you did good work. So that is not the issue. And I had a run-in with Gareth van Onselen on this specifically, one of our fellow liberals. And he seems to be siding with the mainstream press on this. And my what I always try to do when I post about these things is talk about the alternative media and the press, the press. And I had always thought that that distinction was clear to everyone, but clearly it isn't. But like, press is, you're a reporter, you're a journalist, you have a degree in journalism, you're the fourth estate, you are the kind of this branch of society that when you appear in a war zone or you appear kind of at a government building, you actually have to be let in, kind of as a matter of right. You have to be, the door needs to be open to you because you are press and you're coming to discover the facts. And then there's media. Like, we are media. This podcast is media. We're thought leaders. We're podcasters. We're talking heads. We are kind of people who shape public opinion and drive public opinion and so on. But there's a distinction here, because the one depends on the other. Like, when we talk about things happening in South Africa, as you've all alluded to, we are making use of what reporters are telling us. We're making use of facts that reporters with big press badges are going and discovering for us. That is one important part of this, and that is what we as media rely on. But now there's this idea that no, these podcasters are pretending to be press. We're the real press, says News 24. No, but that's not the issue. We as the media have an issue with you as the press when you try to present opinions as factual reporting. That is the issue. That is the issue, and you'll be viciously ripped apart for that every time you try and kind of skirt away from it, as you pointed out, Sakes. And then, Ayanda, I'm glad you brought this up. And Sakes, I think you mentioned it as well. Like, there is a pitfall with alternative media. One is, I think there's a tendency to conspiratize everything. Everything is a grand conspiracy. I think that really harms kind of people's minds. Like, that's not good to public discourse, that everything has to be this big grand thing that's being directed from Davos or something. It's like, just take it easy. And I think the alternative media's time coincided with this time of sensationalization. The mainstream press does it as well. I mean, they do it as well, but the alternative media is just repeating the same mistake. It's like, it's all about the clicks. It's all about sensationalizing everything, kind of saying things in the most absurd possible way that you can. I think that's a problem. And the quickness of everything. Like, I think there's a reason why even the mainstream press of 50 years ago, biased, yes, as it might have been, was more trustworthy. And that is because there was just more time. Like, a journalist could sit down and kind of investigate a story and kind of check all the angles and then report on it, and then in 4 months they did the same thing. That is gone now. Like you have to, like there has to be a story every 10 minutes published on these press sites, and in the alternative press it's far worse. It is far far worse. Like every minute, if you're not tweeting about something happening, you're basically doing something wrong, is the understanding. um, and if you're not talking about everything that's happening as kind of Morning Shot, the Rational Standard, or Ronaldo's show, if we're not talking about absolutely everything all the time, then we're missing something. I think that actually harms social discourse. I think that is very harmful to society in general, and the alternative press isn't helping that. So it's not the cause of the problem. The mainstream press does the same thing, but it is certainly not helping to solve the problem. It's potentially making it worse just because of how it's even quicker than the mainstream press. So there are issues with the alternative media, and I hope that at some point we can have a kind of a social discourse about, we actually just have to apply the brakes a little bit. We just have to start taking things a little bit easier than we have been up to now, because the 24-hour news cycle is actually it's a very problematic thing. But yeah, that's it from my side. I'm gonna give everyone a chance to give a last word, and then we'll wrap it up. David, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think last word is, if the mainstream press wants to restore its credibility, I think leaning into its advantages of serious investigative journalism, I think is good. And, we're, obviously users of social media, but Zakes is the exception. And I think it's a good reminder that like social media is not the only space, like, and actually I think there is something quite corrosive about these personality journalists, like kind of celebrity journalists, if you will. And some journalists obviously have very interesting takes on things and a lot to say, but actually we need to bring back boring journalists. I think the shoe leather kind of investigators who just go about gathering the facts. And often I think when they reveal their ideological preferences or start kind of berating people for sharing misinformation, like they're kind of the head boy and head girl of Twitter, that doesn't come across very well. And so I think sticking to the knitting, doing the hard work, I think is good. But yeah, I agree with Zags. I think just let the market decide. And yeah, sometimes the market is kind of messy and chaotic, but yeah, that's how disruptive innovation works, and that's how things change. And yeah, I think Adriaan says in there that journalism is a public good, and yeah, I think the free flow of information that's useful and helps to inform our civic discourse and what have you. But journalism is also a business, and there's commercial incentives there. And I think when you read that stuff, you must always be aware of what are the incentives at play, who's benefiting from this production of content and the capturing of your attention. I think inculcating a sense of healthy skepticism for all of the content that you consume, whether it's from an established news house or renegade media such as ourselves, I think is a good idea.
Well said. Ayanda.
I think just my closing comment is to reiterate what I said earlier on, that the rise of alternative media is a very positive development. This year in South Africa, we have seen what the media is supposed to do. I think one of its functions is to be a watchdog that holds power to account. And what we saw this year with the United States of America and sort of how the issues we have in South Africa, from race law to other issues like farm murders, have really made their way to America, has been a positive development. It shows what the media is actually supposed to do in a country. It isn't supposed to make excuses for power. It isn't supposed to cower down to power. It is supposed to call power out. And I think that has been one of the benefits of alternative media, that we do have people in that space who aren't afraid to speak truth to power. sometimes you get the sense that in the mainstream press, there are people who don't want to do that, who are reluctant or who are hesitant to do so. But this year alone, what I've seen in alternative media, with people being unafraid to report, unafraid to share their views, it has really been a positive for our democracy. And today we can see now that issues that we have in our country are on the agenda in America, and that has been a positive, really. And that's thanks to alternative media.
Absolutely. Well said. Jakes.
Yeah. I don't know whether I agree with South African issues being on the agenda in America. A good thing. I will reiterate, no country that has had American intervention come out the other side going, hey, hey, all hunky dory, all good right here. Thank you, Uncle Sam. So there's that, but probably a topic for another day. So yeah, I guess me on the other side, right? The beauty of the marketplace is that these views can exist, right? There's alternative media that will probably reflect a view similar to mine that is like, no to the United States trying to tell us what is wrong or right about our domestic affairs, because where does it get off, I guess. And then there will be other medias like, please, US, come and tell us what to do. And this is the beauty of liberty. The beauty of the beauty of liberty is that both of these perspectives can exist. And same with the mainstream media. And I think, Martin, you raise a good point, right? Like, we should make that distinction of the press being the press. I read a whole lot of news stories, and organizations like Reuters, I find to be extremely valuable, to at least important to the dissemination of information. And I think we should not at least lose sight of that. Maybe people like Adriaan are trying to communicate that maybe even as much as we mess up, we still do this very important thing that becomes the basis of you making decisions concerning who do you vote for, who do you not vote for. And things that change society. And also on the alternative media side, like, these are important voices, as you all have said. They raise issues that people feel the need to be raised. So I'm like, yeah, man, liberty is amazing. These are my final thoughts. Liberty is great, and live and let live.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think just what Ayanda said earlier about they should play open cards if their values, and David then saying, well, when they show their values, it undermines their credibility. I think that both those things can be true, depending on the situation. And I think what we have now is a completely ideologized media landscape, and it's being hidden. And I think under these circumstances, in fact, they should say, listen, just to be clear, I'm a progressive, I vote ANC, and I'm now reporting on what's happening in the country, but just kind of bear that in mind. But there was, or there can be a situation where even with kind of your ideology, you are able to some degree, and I don't think it's ever absolutely possible, you are able to some degree to just say what happened in a situation, to just present the facts. And I think you've seen that throughout history at various points. But I lean definitely to the side of, yes, you should try to do that as far as you can, but also just tell your readers where you're coming from. Um, just make that clear. And I think kind of for people like Walter Cronkite and so on, who are seen as the creme de la creme of the golden age of journalism, I think it was clear at the time that he was a Democrat. I think people kind of understood this. He was a man of the left, but people still trusted him because he did make that effort. So yeah, I think those two things can be true, and we would be in a much better place if both those things can kind of meet in the middle. We don't have that at all currently in South Africa. And yeah, we're going to see with interest how the press reports on the Julius Malema matter, and we'll also report back on that. Certainly, Malema has been the darling of the media for many years, and then the arch enemy number one, a very kind of a schizophrenic relationship between Julius Malema and the mainstream press. So we'll see what happens there. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today, my fellow panelists, and of course our audience. It's been another busy week in South Africa and certainly abroad. We didn't get into the Gaza deal that's now being proposed. Very interesting stuff to follow. So we're gonna keep a close eye on that as well. I want to thank you again for joining us and remind you to please like this video, share it with your network, subscribe to the Rational Standard YouTube channel if you want to keep up to date with what we put out, and also restack this content and our written content on rationalstandard.co.za. It's a Substack platform. And of course, visit us at freemarketfoundation.com as well. Rational Standard is one of our flagship initiatives. So please see what the think tank side of our work also gets up to every now and then. But that's it from us, and we will see you again next Friday at noon. Cheerio.